Welcome to On the Money Line, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome, and we're here back again to break down UFC Vegas 86, which goes down this weekend at the Apex again. You know, the Apex events are okay. You know, there's the positives, such as, you know, being able to hear the coaches, hearing the strikes land a little bit harder. But, you know, I do miss the crowd, you know, when somebody lands a big punch and the hometown or home country favourite fighters doing well and pushing the pace and the crowd goes wild type of thing. You know, it's nice to have a balance of both. But we're back at the Apex again this weekend. This week we've got Hermansson versus Pyfer, which is old guard versus new guard type of main event, So yeah, it's an interesting fight. And on paper, I actually think it's going to be a pretty fun card. We've got 14 fights, so, you know, heads up, the podcast might be a little bit longer than usual. But yeah, 14 fights on paper. They look like there's going to be some absolute bangers. So I am looking forward to the event this weekend. I do think it's going to be a good one. And just before we get started, as always, if you want to jump into the action, if you want a little bit of fun, or if you're playing the long-term game from a betting perspective, then make sure you check out our website, which is MMAplay365.com. We've got plenty on there for everybody, even if you only want the $1.99 dog of the week, where you get the handicapper's favourite underdog, so my favourite underdog, and the highest percentage underdog from Baze AI, our UFC prediction software. You get two underdogs just for $2. If both of them lose, we give you your money back anyway. But if you do want to go more in depth, have a little bit more fun, then we've got packages that include both the Baze AI and handicapper advice. That's full Baze AI predictions, full handicapper advice, long-term gamblers section in there as well, along with the fun parlays and official bets from myself. And like I said, everything from Baze AI as well. We don't split them up, so that's included in, you know, every subscription. Just pick your length, next event, monthly or annual. Again, if you're interested in jumping into the action, make sure you hit up MMAplay365.com. And with that out of the way, let's jump straight into the breakdowns, into the fights. And of course, as always, we start with the main event. We've got Hermansson versus Joe Pyfer. And like I said in the introduction, this is old guard versus new guard. Joe Pyfer, massive step up in competition and in card placement as well. Obviously, Pyfer's had a lot of hype behind him. He's very well-rounded. He's physical for the division, big, powerful, good striker, good wrestling, good grappling. Although we haven't seen too much of the wrestling and grappling, we haven't needed to because he's getting the work done on the feet. So it's going to be interesting in this specific fight because I don't think that he is going to get Hermansson out of there, really. I do think that this is going to be a real step up in competition for Pyfer. I think he's going to be forced to fight everywhere. I think we're going to see striking. I think we're going to see wrestling and grappling. And we're really going to see the full game of Joe Pyfer in this fight. And the thing is, the reason we'll see that is because Hermansson is that type of fighter. He's a bit of an awkward striker, but awkward doesn't mean bad. You know, he's very efficient at what he does. Obviously, really good wrestler, known for his nasty ground and pound, real tricky submission game as well. So all in all, I actually think it's a pretty well-matched fight between two fighters that are genuinely good everywhere. Now, my only concern for Joe Pyfer in this fight, and it's not really a concern about Pyfer as a fighter, it's just the situation. Now, we've seen this old guard, new guard type of fight so many times, and it's always the case of it's concerning because the new guard fighter, the fighter that's got this big step up in competition, is a relatively sized favourite. And at the time of recording this, I think Pyfer's around -200, -220. You know, it'll vary depending on what bookie you go to, but Joe Pyfer's a moderate favourite in this fight. So that's always the concern because it's that fighter that's, you know, got the step up in competition. And there's so many different examples, but the one that I'm going to use is Edmund Shabazian versus Derek Brunson, for those that remember that. Again, Shabazian, the hype was all on Shabazian. He was this wonder kid on his way up, great striking, knocking everybody out, but he also had wrestling, he also had grappling, and he has that step up in competition. I believe that was a main event as well against Derek Brunson, and Brunson just absolutely mopped the floor with him, and Shabazian was like a -300, -400 favourite there. So again, price a little bit lower on Pyfer, but that's my only really concern. My only real concern. But I do think Pyfer's different, and I am gravitating more towards him in this fight, just because, like I said, he's very physical for the division. He's powerful. We've seen clean, crisp striking. We know that the wrestling and grappling's there if he needs it. Like I say, the slight concerns is the fact that he hasn't really faced too much adversity inside the cage. Is Hermansson that type of fighter to put it on Pyfer and, really push him through those adversity moments? Potentially. Jack Hermansson, he's done 5 rounds before. We know he can push the pace for 5 rounds. So it's going to be a real tough fight for Pyfer. It's not going to be anything like we've seen before with Joe Pyfer. It's a completely different level of opponent. It's 5 rounds as well. But I do think that because Jack Hermansson is the good all-round type of fighter, it's going to force the best out of Joe Pyfer. And I do think, at least from a mental perspective, that Joe Pyfer is going to thrive in this type of fight. From a skill set perspective, they're all very, it's very similar. The striking's relatively close. The wrestling and grappling is going to be relatively close. But I just think Pyfer, that youthful energy, a fighter on the up, I just think, especially from a striking perspective, he's going to have more power. That might cause a little bit more pause in Jack Hermansson if Hermansson is wanting to wrestle and grapple and close the distance. But every time he does, he's getting hit hard by Pyfer. So yeah, I think it's a well-matched fight. I think it's a good fight. It's definitely a step up in competition for Pyfer. I do worry about Pyfer in the betting line, because he's the moderate favourite in this type of fight, but I am leaning towards the new guard. I think strength, power, youth on his side. Yeah, I like Pyfer in this fight. I'm picking Joe Pyfer to win this fight. And in the next fight, in the co-main event, this is a fight that's only been here for about 4 weeks. Dan Ige versus Andre Fili. Dan Ige originally was supposed to fight Lerone Murphy. Lerone Murphy's pulled out, and it's one of these fights, again, there might be a difference of opinion here, but my opinion is it's one of those fights that the original fight fell apart, but now we've been left with a better fight. And I do believe Andre Fili is a step up from Lerone Murphy. That's no disrespect to Lerone Murphy. I think Andre Fili is a phenomenal fighter. But the other good thing as well is it's not as if it's like on 1 week notice or 2 weeks notice. Yes, Fili hasn't had a full 8-week camp. He's had pretty much half a camp. I think it's 4 or 5 weeks notice. But also, he's coming off that early knockout just before Christmas. So again, he's not really had too much downtime. He's going to be in shape. I think it's a really good fight. And how they match up from a skill perspective, I think it's one of these fights where we don't get it too often, where, in my opinion, every single area of this fight is just so evenly matched. I'm struggling to find any real solid edges in any discipline, wherever the fight takes place, on either fighter. Like, from a striking perspective, both of them are great strikers. I think Dan Ige is slightly more durable, packs slightly more power, but Andre Fili, I think he's more diverse with the arsenal of strikes. He'll use his kicks a lot better. He'll switch stances more efficiently as well, fire well from both of those stances. He does well moving forwards, moving backwards equally. So although Ige's got the more power, slight more power and slight more durability, Fili, I think, is the better quality of striker in regards to the types of strikes he's going to throw and how he puts everything together. Then you look at the wrestling. Again, the wrestling is so close. Maybe the slight edge to Fili in regards to, he's got a better offensive wrestling game, slightly better defensively as well, but is it going to be enough where he's going to be able to throw Ige about? I don't think so. I think Ige is good enough from a wrestling perspective to be able to handle his own there. Then you look at the grappling. Again, Fili, a real tricky grappler to deal with, but probably give a slight edge to Dan Ige. It's just where are the edges in this fight? I just don't think the edges are there. I just think it's a really well-matched fight. It's going to be one of them where I think if they fight 10 times, you'll see a different outcome each time. If they go to 10 decisions, change the 3 judges numerous times in those 10 decisions, and you probably get, a numerous amount of different scorecards. It's just a really, really well-matched fight. And yeah, it's tough to really gain the edges. I am, with the fighter that I'm going to be siding with, I do feel that well, I'm going to, spoiler alert, I'm going to be siding with Andre Fili in this fight. I think that, the more diverse striking arsenal and the slightly better wrestling and also being able to deal with Danny Igue's grappling, I think just separates Fili just that slight bit. Where Danny Ige will normally get off on fighters when they can't deal with the grappling. I think Andre Fili's jiu-jitsu, especially off his back, is really good. He's able to get back up to his feet. He doesn't give up on his back either, where he just lays there and doesn't do anything. So, yeah, I think Andre Fili is going to be able to have an answer for the grappling of Danny Ige. If Danny Ige does win this fight, I do think it's probably a case of he lands something that hurts Fili, changes the course of the fight, and that's a possibility as well. Like I said, even though Fili is the more diverse striker, I do think Ige holds more power. But then Fili's got some wrestling as well. Is Danny Ige going to submit Fili off his back? It's very unlikely. I do think it's a fight that's won and lost on the feet. I think there's going to be a lot of close moments. I think it's going to be a super close fight. But like I said, if you're forcing me for a pick, I'm separating them very, very slightly and siding with Fili. So I'm picking Andre Fili to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is a short notice fight as well for one side of the fight. We've got Ihor Potieria versus Robert Bryczek. Robert Bryczek was supposed to fight Albert Duraev. Albert Duraev pulled out a couple of days ago, or at least we found out about it a couple of days ago. And so Ihor Potieria stepped in, and I'm a little bit gutted, to be honest, because Bryczek was an underdog to Duraev, and I had a breakdown written for Bryczek to bet him, so he was definitely going to be a bet. And yeah, now Duraev's out and we've got a new opponent. And I actually think, look, from take away the betting side of this, I actually think this is now a more fun fight. So yeah, I think it's going to be fireworks. Ihor Potieria is a good striker. He's going to bring it, pace, pressure, in your face. Bryczek is an absolute wrecking ball on the other side. But he's only just recently become this wrecking ball. And like, you go back and watch, 5, 6, 7 fights ago, and, he looked pretty average. Again, no disrespect, just looked like a decent fighter, nothing special, but, will handle himself. Decent striking, can defend some takedowns, but can get taken down. If he is taken down, then, he can get back up to his feet. Again, just your average fighter, but then in these last 4 fights, man, it's just knockout after knockout after knockout. And these are, accumulation of strikes over numerous rounds that he's ended up finding these knockouts. This is power in the left hand, power in the right hand, like the death touch. As soon as he's putting his hands on his opponents, they are going down or they are getting rocked, doing the chicken dance. And, at that point, it's all she wrote really from there. So, look, Bryczek, like I say, is this wrecking ball. Potieria is coming in on short notice. I think Potieria is going to bring the best out of Bryczek here. I think he's going to stand and strike. Bryczek will absolutely love that. Bryczek's got to be careful, though, because Potieria does possess some power. But, again, when they're exchanging and they're both hitting each other, I just feel that, at least from the recent footage that I've seen of Bryczek's power he's got that level above type of power where he is deading dudes and hurting them, even with like shots that don't look like the landing at 100% flush. Even the clipping shots, the glancing shots are hurting the opponents. And I think Potieria might start well, but coming in on short notice, I don't think that's going to last. And Potieria's got that issue anyway. Even in his last fight, started really well, didn't last. So, yeah, I think that Bryczek definitely has to mind his P's and Q's early, but I think he's going to find that kill shot on Potieria and put him out. So, for those reasons, I'm picking Robert Bryczek to win this fight. And in the next fight, it's an interesting fight this. We've got Brad Tavares versus Gregory Rodrigues. And I kind of feel that Brad Tavares is probably coming up to the end of at least fighting at this level in the UFC. I wouldn't say career, because he's not like chinny, or not necessarily chinny, and he's obviously still a decent fighter. He's putting the work in, I believe, at Extreme Couture still. So, but I think that in the UFC, he's getting up there in age. He's got a lot of miles on the clock as well. And what I've just looked into actually is, and I want to read this list out to you of the fighters, the last 7 fighters that he's beaten in the UFC. So we've got Kyle Magalhaes, Elias Theodorou, rest in peace, Elias, Thales Leites, Christoph Jotko, Antonio Carlos Jr., Omari Akhmedov, Chris Weidman. Now, I believe Jotko's still in the UFC. Obviously, Weidman's still in the UFC as well. But all those other fighters are no longer in the UFC. And even, obviously, before the tragic death of Elias Theodorou, he wasn't in the UFC at that point. So I think that Tavares, you look at the fighters that he's winning against, again, they're just, like I say, they're probably not been in the UFC for too much longer after Tavares has beaten them. And then you look at the fights that he's lost, obviously, Robert Whittaker, Israel Adesanya, you can't really take those two or read too much into those, but Edmund Shabazian, he knocked Brad Tavares out in round 1. Dricus Du Plessis had Brad Tavares in way too much trouble, and I know Du Plessis is obviously the current champion right now, but Brad Tavares, had a good first round against him and then just got absolutely smoked. Then he got knocked out by Bruno Silva in round 1, the fight after that, and I just feel that with Brad Tavares, like I said, I just don't know how much longer he's got. And then you've got Gregory Rodrigues on the other side, and Rodrigues is an absolute powerhouse himself, real good wrestling, world-class grappling. I don't think the wrestling and the grappling is going to be as much of a factor in this fight for Rodrigues, though, and that's because Brad Tavares has got that godlike takedown defense where it's almost impossible to take him down, and that's probably one of the reasons why he's beating guys like Omari Akhmedov and Antonio Carlos Jr., who were just trying for the life to take him down and couldn't do it. So I don't foresee Rodrigues having too much success against Brad Tavares in regards to the wrestling, and therefore the grappling doesn't come into play. So I think it's a fight that is going to take place on the feet, but Rodrigues is a real good boxer, like real powerful boxer as well, will come forwards. I think that Rodrigues has got a little bit of a chinny side to him, just like Tavares, but I don't think Tavares has got necessarily got the power to really cause too many issues for Rodrigues, whereas I think Rodrigues has got the power to cause issues for Tavares, and that's where I think the difference is. I think it's going to be a crisp and clean performance from Rodrigues. I think it's going to be a well-matched fight for the most part, but I just see Rodrigues landing the cleaner strikes, good combinations. I think he's going to be able to walk Tavares down, and I think once he starts landing on Tavares, it could be an issue, and I think Tavares might start thinking, oh my God, it's happening again, like it happened against Silva, just 2 fights ago, that pressure and just being landed on. So yeah, look, I think it's a good fight. I think it's a well-matched fight. I think Tavares will have his moments, but I think Rodrigues is going to be the cleaner striker, more powerful, better combinations, and I just think he's going to land on Tavares, land the harder shots, which even if he doesn't knock him out and they go to the judges like to see that type of strike and that type of fighter. So yeah, for those reasons, in this fight, I'm picking Gregory Rodrigues to win the fight. And in the next fight, we've got Michael Johnson versus Darrius Flowers. Now, I can't believe the line was actually so close initially. Like, I'm sure it was pretty much a pick'em for, a few days at least after the lines were released. Michael Johnson has started to move out a little bit. Now the line is widened and, he's sitting anywhere between sort of -130, -150, which is probably roughly where he should be. But yeah, look, like Michael Johnson is the better fighter here, like everywhere. Better striker, better wrestler, better grappler, more experienced as well. Fought the much better level of competition, beaten the much better level of competition. But where it gets very scary for Michael Johnson is he's had a few fights now where he's looked great and then he's just been absolutely deaded. And look, maybe the two that I'm going to use for an example are the Josh Emmett and the Diego Ferreira fight. So with Josh Emmett, maybe you can give Michael Johnson a pass for that, because Josh Emmett is the hardest hitter in the division. I've said it for a while, and he knocks dudes out cold, completely and utterly dead dudes. Like, look at the one-punch KO of Bryce Mitchell just a few weeks ago. And then, like I said, maybe you can give Johnson the pass for that fight, but you go to the Ferreira fight last time out, and look, Ferreira's got power, you can't take that away from him, but Ferreira isn't known for that Josh Emmett type of big right-hand power, and Ferreira, that was probably a worse knockout for Michael Johnson. Like, Johnson went stiff, and you just wonder if this is going to be a consistent theme, because like you'll see Johnson, he'll have fights, and like when he got knocked out against Damir, he's had a few fights after that and he's been hit and he's looked fine, and then he was looking great against Vieira as well, taking the punches, but then he gets hit and knocked out real bad again, and it's like it almost comes when you least expect it, and at some point it's going to become a problem where, you know, that chin just doesn't hold up. And the one thing that you can say about Darrius Flowers is he's very aggressive, he's very powerful, and he packs a punch. So is it going to be another one of those fights where Michael Johnson is doing absolutely great until he's not, until he's laid on his back and he's unconscious? It's a tough one, because like I said, from a skill set perspective, Johnson is way better than Flowers absolutely everywhere, and he's got more experience, and like I said, fought the better level of competition, and he's been around for years. But it's that concern of Flowers just need to land that one clean big punch on Michael Johnson to, you know, take away all that skill set, all those skills advantages that Johnson has in the different areas and different disciplines of mixed martial arts. And we see this time and time again. And, you know, ultimately, you know, this is mixed martial arts. This is the UFC at the highest level where, you know, elite level fighters are wearing 4-ounce gloves, and more often than not, it is the fighter that's, you know, not being able to take the shots so much that ends up getting hit and getting knocked out. And that's what we see more often than not. The thing is with Johnson, the chin issues are a little bit inconsistent. So what I can't do is, for example, like Phil Hawes, shall we say, a few weeks back, we know Phil Hawes has chin issues, durability issues, because it happens time and time again. But with Johnson, he'll get knocked out bad, have a few fights where he's fine, and then get knocked out bad again. So it's a little bit inconsistent. I can't definitely tell you that Michael Johnson has got real durability issues where Flowers, all it's going to take is one clean shot. And that's why, because more often than not, I will side with the guy that's, you know, that's got the serious bad durability issues, but I'm just not 100% certain that Johnson is just going to go down with that one big shot or wobble off that one big shot. And because of that, and because of how much of a better fighter he is outside of that one red flag, that's why I'm leaning towards Michael Johnson. So for those reasons, I'm picking Michael Johnson to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is actually a rebooked fight from a few months ago, I think. I'm not sure whether I actually did a breakdown for this or not, but we've got Rodolfo Vieira versus Armen Petrosyan. I actually had 2 units on Rodolfo Vieira at plus 110 before this fight was cancelled last time out. I think it might have even been like a fight day cancellation. I don't know, I can't remember, but I did have Rodolfo Vieira bet. However, he was plus money, plus 110. It's pretty much a pick'em, I believe, right now between Vieira and Petrosyan. And it is rightfully a pick'em. The reason I bet Vieira last time is because it was one of these 50-50 fights where, you know, both fighters are it's a very well matched fight stylistically, because Vieira's obviously the elite grappler, Petrosyan's the elite striker, but then Petrosyan isn't that great on the mat and Vieira's not that great striking. So both the strengths are each other's weaknesses, and it is an absolute pick'em type of fight. And it wasn't pick'em money last time, so that's why I bet Vieira, because that was where my edge was in, you know, the plus money that I believed was a coin flip. But look, I've pretty much just described the fight there for you. Like, Rodolfo Vieira is an elite grappler, and if he does get Petrosyan down, he's going to have success against him. Petrosyan's not the worst fighter in regards to a get-up game, but Vieira's like way more elite in regards to the grappling than anyone that Petrosyan's fought. And even when you go back to the Caio Borralho fight, Borralho just completely smothered him, and I think Vieira could do exactly the same. The concern with Vieira is if he doesn't get Petrosyan out in maybe the first 7.5 minutes, maybe 2 rounds, I do think Vieira's gas tank is lesser than Petrosyan. So if Petrosyan's more fresh and Vieira hasn't gotten him out of there, then I think the takedowns will struggle to come a little bit late, and Petrosyan could take over later. And like I said, for as elite as a grappler Vieira is, Petrosyan is an elite striker and levels ahead of Vieira in regards to the striking. So whilst it's on the feet, Petrosyan's going to, you know, be coasting. He's going to be absolutely comfortable. He's not going to be in any danger. He's the one that will be controlling the fight and winning the fight. So like I said, it all comes down to does Vieira get the takedowns that he needs? And I think he does, at least early on. And I believe that that's all he's going to need early on to get Petrosyan out of there, because I do think that if Vieira spends 2 minutes, 2 minutes 30 on top of Petrosyan, that he will find a finish and he will get him out of there. If he doesn't, then obviously it's a completely different fight, because the longer the fight goes on, they always restart back on the feet. It's going to be tougher for Vieira, but I do believe that Vieira will need maybe a couple of takedowns at the most. I think he'll be able to get that in the first half of the fight and should be able to get Petrosyan out of there. So for those reasons, I'm picking Rodolfo Vieira to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Trevin Giles versus the newcomer Carlos Prates. Carlos Prates, man, this kid looks exciting, tall, long, sniper, real, like, old school Muay Thai style, where he really doesn't move at all in regards to, moving laterally, getting in and out of range, light on his toes. He's very flat-footed, southpaw, reactive type of sniper, type of Muay Thai fighter. Like, this is a traditional Muay Thai type of fighter, and the dude is just insane. Like, hard straight punches, he's got knees, he's got multiple head kick, at least knockdowns. I think he's got a couple of head kick knockouts, but man, he's just an absolute wrecking machine on the feet. He's a real exciting fighter to watch. Trevin Giles, I think the UFC know what they're doing here. Like, Trevin Giles is your good all-round type of fighter, so he's going to have some wrestling and grappling to be able to be mixed in here, potentially take Prates down, potentially do some good work on him, but just test Prates. I think it's more of the UFC just saying, look, Giles is not going to compete with Prates striking. I mean, obviously, like I've said before, this is the UFC level, 4-ounce gloves and all that, but take away the puncher's chance, Giles is not going to compete with Prates on the feet. So I think it's a way of the UFC just seeing exactly where Prates is at, give him an average wrestler and grappler. When I say average, I mean like UFC level average. Give him an average wrestler and grappler, and let's see where he's at before we start giving him the step-ups. And I think Giles provides exactly that. I think he's going to, look, if he does try and strike with Prates, I think very quickly he's going to realise that he needs to shoot takedowns. And then we're going to see Giles, I think, actually probably do some decent work with the wrestling and grappling early on. But the problem that I've got with Giles, and I've always had this with Giles, is that he can, in some fights he looks great, and then suddenly it's a real unforced error, a bad mistake, and it changes the course of the fight, or, puts him in a terrible position and gives his opponents opportunities to not only win but finish him. And it's just bad decision making, bad fight IQ, and like I said, unforced errors, I think is the right word, is the right phrase to use with Trevin Giles. So that's the issue that I've always had with him. And look, like I say, I do think in this fight he's going to be more dialed in to know exactly what he needs to do. But I don't think that Carlos Prates is a fish out of water on his back. I think maybe Giles does get takedowns, but I think Prates can get back up. And I do think this fight is ultimately, although there's going to be wrestling and grappling moments, I think it'll be decided by the striking. And I cannot look past Carlos Prates in regards to that. Look, we'll see what Prates is really like when he gets the big step up in competition. Let's see how elite his striking is then. But for right now, it's going to be way too much for Giles, and I think he's probably going to knock Giles out. So for those reasons, I'm picking Carlos Prates to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got another newcomer. We've got Bolaji Oki versus Damir Hadzovic. Now, if you go back a few fights ago, Bolaji Oki, he looked okay. Didn't really look too elite in regards to, you wouldn't have said, okay, this kid's going to be in the UFC, but if you watch his fights in chronological order, you can see a natural progression and development with Oki, and I think he's entering the UFC at the right time. I think if it had been a couple of years ago, it'd have been too soon, but he's entering the UFC at the right time. He's got a good all-round game, he's got a bit of wrestling, he's got a bit of grappling, he's got power on the feet as well. He also moves in and out of range really well, and he's just, at the minute, he's okay, and no pun intended there with the name, but he's okay at this level against a fighter like Damir Hadzovic. Let's see how he looks against Hadzovic and see where he progresses, or, if he does lose, see, where he's at sort of after this fight. But it's a real It's a real good testing point for him. A little bit like Prates, to be honest, what I explained in the last fight that I broke down. It's one of those where I think the UFC have matched him up well. Let's see, let's put him against a good all-round fighter and let's see how he does. Like Damir Hadzovic is predominantly a striker. He has wrestled and grappled in the past, but he's also been out-wrestled and grappled as well. He's just one of these mid-range UFC fighters, mid-tier UFC fighters that are absolutely UFC caliber. Will never likely to enter the rankings, and they provide stern tests for these types of fighters that are coming into the UFC. And I don't mean any disrespect saying that. Like I said, Hadzovic is a UFC level fighter and a decent fighter, and he's one that's going to provide a good test for Oki in this fight. But I think it's one of these tests where it's going to bring the best out of Oki, and I do think we're going to see a good performance. I think, like I say, the striking is probably going to be close here, but Oki's athletic, he's got power, he could hurt Hadzovic, but in regards to the wrestling and grappling, I think you can really get at Hadzovic with the wrestling and grappling, and that's where I think that Oki should be targeting and probably will target. Like I said, I'm not 1,000,000% sure of exactly the sort of ceiling that Oki's got right now, but in this specific fight, I do think it's going to be enough to beat somebody like Hadzovic, and it's going to be a good name on Oki's record as well. So look, I think Oki's got enough tools to win this fight, and for those reasons, I'm picking Bolaji Oki to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got the returning Loma Lookboonmee, who it seems that we haven't seen in quite a while, against Bruna Brasil. And again, it's another really well-matched fight. Bruna Brasil came into the UFC with a load of hype, and that hype sort of got derailed a little bit when she lost to Denise Gomes. Didn't really look like great, but look, Denise Gomes went on to have a couple of real solid performances where, she's looking like a decent fighter herself. So it's a loss that's probably aged quite well for Bruna Brasil. Loma Lookboonmee, though, again, from a striking perspective, that's where Denise Gomes got at Bruna Brasil, and I think Loma Lookboonmee is going to get at her in a similar way. Loma Lookboonmee, real traditional Muay Thai, but has worked really hard to change that Muay Thai style into a more of an MMA style. She's had a couple of tough fights where, she's been humbled a little bit with the wrestling and the grappling, but I don't think that Bruna Brasil got that level of wrestling and grappling to really cause Lookboonmee those problems where she's completely stuck and nullified and can't really do anything in regards to, attacking off her back or getting back up to her feet. I don't think Bruna Brasil's got that level of grappling. And Lookboonmee's actually looked decent in regards to, sort of showing a bit of her wrestling and grappling game as well. But it's definitely a fight where I do think the majority of the fight is going to take place on the feet. That's where it's going to be won and lost. And Bruna Brasil's going to have some advantages there, by the way. Like, she's 5 inches taller. She's going to have a 5-inch reach advantage. She stands very tall, fights very long. So Loma Lookboonmee is going to have to be the fighter that's working harder. But I don't think that's a problem. And she's got 3 rounds of cardio, like, quite comfortably when it comes to striking. I think she's going to chop away at Bruna Brasil from the bottom, just start chewing the legs up, the calf up, and then once that slows Brasil down, then she's going to be able to get inside and land the strikes that she needs and maybe force the fight against a clinch where she can land some knees and land some elbows. I think that Brasil's going to, again, and I've said this a lot in this podcast, I think Brasil, it's a well-matched fight, but I think Brasil is going to bring the best out of Lookboonmee with the way that this fight's going to play out. I think Brasil is going to really give Lookboonmee the fight that she wants and a fight where she's going to thrive in. So for those reasons, I'm picking Loma Lookboonmee to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Devin Clark versus Marcin Prachnio. And again, look, props to the UFC because they're providing some really well-matched fights here. And I don't think there's a great deal between these two, but I do think that Prachnio is the lesser fighter. Like, you look at the fights that he's won, the Khalil Roundtree fight, I've still got no idea what happened there, but maybe an off night for Roundtree. But if they fight again another 10 times, I don't think Prachnio beats him too many of those. And after then, Prachnio beat Ike Villanueva, who is just not there, and William Knight, who is absolutely not there either. And the thing is, although he's winning against the lesser guys, you could make the argument that, well, is Prachnio just losing against the real good guys? And I just don't feel like a lot of the losses that he's taken are against the super top guys, apart from obviously Magomed Ankalaev, but this is a guy that got knocked out by Sam Alvey during the end of Sam Alvey's MMA career. So, yeah, I'm not really sold on Prachnio at all. In regards to Devin Clark, I don't think he's a fighter that's ever going to hit the rankings, but you know where Devin Clark's at. Like, Devin Clark is that type of fighter that I've just explained, where he's going to lose against fighters that are ahead of him in the, in the rankings type of thing, but he's also going to beat decent fighters as well. And again, the level of competition of fighters that Clark's going to beat, and he will only really lose against the fighters that are better than him. And I don't think Marcin Prachnio is better than him. I think that Clark has got some decent striking. I think if he stands and strikes with Prachnio, he's just going to give Prachnio opportunities to find a knockout or to find a finish, because Prachnio, to his credit, he is aggressive and he does have power. But where Clark's going to have a real advantage is with the wrestling and grappling. I think he's going to be able to get Prachnio down, mix things up, really. Even if Clark wants to stand and strike with Prachnio, and Prachnio's getting into a bit of a flow, into a bit of a rhythm, Clark can just nullify that and shut it down straight away with one takedown, even if he doesn't complete it, just to really mix things up and let Prachnio know that he can't strike for too long before he's going to get shot at or taken down. And I think that's where Devin Clark's really going to thrive in this fight. And yeah, like I say, I just think he's a better fighter. It is well matched in regards to where both fighters are at in the UFC, but I just think Devin Clark's better. I think he's got more ways to win. And like I said, these are the types of fights that Clark tends to win. Clark will usually only lose against the much better guys, but against Marcin Prachnio, I think he's better. I think he wins. I'm picking Devin Clark to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Jeremiah Wells versus Max Griffin. Those that have been listening to my podcast for a while and following me know exactly what I feel about Jeremiah Wells. I really like Wells as a fighter. When others have tried to fade him, I've been cashing him at plus money. Only a couple of times, I've probably made that sound like I've been doing that for a lifetime, but yeah, I've cashed on him a couple of times at plus money, and I like his style. He's getting up there in age. He's 37, he's old, but man, you would never have guessed he's 37 even if you just look at him statically. Like, he doesn't look 37, but then when you watch him fight, he certainly doesn't look like a 37-year-old with the way he moves, how explosive he is, how powerful he is, good cardio as well. He had a bit of a setback last time out. He got caught in the anaconda choke against Carlston Harris, which, that's Harris's move, the anaconda choke. And, Jeremiah Wells was controlling that fight, doing really well, on his way to winning, and then bang, third round, one mistake, head in the anaconda choke, and Carlston Harris locks it up, which he's done to so many fighters over the years. I don't think you can really hold that against Jeremiah Wells. It's one of those low percentage outcomes that, again, is probably not going to happen too much, if not at all. Like, I don't see it happening again. And Max Griffin's a decent fighter who's going to provide a tough test for Jeremiah Wells. Griffin's well-rounded, decent striking, decent wrestling, decent grappling. It's tough to really whitewash somebody like Griffin because he is so good everywhere, but because he's very well-rounded, he's not really a specialist in one particular area, and that's where he can be got at when he does fight a specialist. And the thing is with Jeremiah Wells, this is a specialist grappler. Like, the dude's just an elite level black belt with decent wrestling, reckless striking. That's where Griffin's going to get him. If Griffin wins this fight, he's going to get Wells on a clean punch during an exchange, during one of Wells's early bursts of speed, pace, power, trying to land on his opponent to knock them out. That's where Griffin will get him if he wins the fight. If Griffin can't land that punch in an exchange in between the crazy wild strikes that Wells is throwing early on, I think it's going to be a long night for Griffin. I think for a start, Wells could potentially catch Griffin in those exchanges as well and knock him out. But if that doesn't happen and they're both still standing after the crazy, storm that Wells comes with early on, I think Wells will get to his wrestling. I think he'll be able to get the takedowns. I think he'll slowly start to break Griffin down with the grappling and spend longer and longer on top of Griffin through each takedown. Potentially maybe even get a finish on the mat as well, but I think Jeremiah Wells is the better athlete. I think he's more well-rounded. He's a specialist with the grappling, with knockout power and good explosive wrestling as well. So for me, it's hard to really look past Wells, although Griffin will be that stern test for Wells that will make Wells work for the win, but I do think he wins nonetheless. I'm picking Jeremiah Wells to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Zach Pauga versus Bogdan Guskov. And this is an interesting fight, especially from Guskov's perspective, because Bogdan Guskov, he was a fighter that I believe I was a little bit unsure of. Like, he looked good in regards to pre-UFC knocking fighters out, but then there was a couple of moments where you're thinking, well, what happens if he doesn't get the knockout and gets extended, and what happens when he finally fights like a real tough fighter? And he fought Volkan Ozdemir, and that was absolutely the right fight for Guskov to know exactly where he's at. If Guskov goes in there and knocks out Ozdemir, then okay, the dude's for real. But that's not what happened at all. What actually happened is Guskov faced an opponent at a level that he's never fought before, got found out a little bit, couldn't get the knockout, actually got taken down by a fighter who's predominantly a striker, didn't really have an answer off his back, and then got choked out. So a pretty bad performance from Guskov, if I'm being honest. But, and this is the key thing, Ozdemir is always going to be a very tough test. If you beat a guy like Ozdemir on your UFC debut, you're more than likely going to be, in and around that UFC gold, like a Jiří Procházka, for example. And Guskov, all that tells me right now is he can be beaten, he can be got at, and he's not going to be in and around that UFC gold. But Zach Pauga is also not around that UFC gold either. Like, Pauga's not a fighter that I've been overly impressed with. I cashed Mohammed Usman as a massive underdog against Pauga. Yeah, it was a fight that Pauga was looking okay in, and, probably getting the better of Usman, and then Usman landed that big shot and knocked him out. But again, it just speaks to, the fact that Pauga can be winning a fight and get finished. And last time out against Modestas Bukauskas, he lost there. I actually thought Pauga won that fight, if I'm being fair to Pauga. I didn't think Modestas Bukauskas won whilst I was watching it happen live. And then even when I rewatched it, I think, although it's very close, it wasn't a robbery, I did think Pauga won that fight against Modestas Bukauskas. But again, and no disrespect to Modestas Bukauskas, but, he's not a massively shining light in the division either. So I actually think this is a pretty well-matched fight. I think Pauga's going to have the volume and the technical advantage on the feet striking, but Guskov's going to have this power, man. Like, he's genuinely got power, and we've seen Pauga hurt, we've seen him knocked out, and I do think that there's a very good possibility that Guskov, this is I can't stress it enough, it's a massive step down in competition from making your UFC debut against a Volkan Ozdemir. Like, it's a huge step down in competition. Guskov was probably, for a lack of a better phrase, thrown to the wolves with that Ozdemir fight. This is the type of fight where we could see the best out of Guskov. Pauga, can he get the takedowns? Potentially, that's one option. But that's one thing that I saw from Guskov that I didn't like, the fact that, he was taken down, he didn't really have an answer off his back. Maybe that's a path to victory for Pauga, but I do think that this fight is going to probably take place on the feet. Pauga is more of a striker. He's well-rounded, but he's more of a striker than he is a wrestler or grappler, and I do think that if Pauga starts getting up on some volume and some good technical strikes, like simple jabs, straight 1-2 combinations down the middle, he'll probably try and keep that momentum going on the feet, but all that's going to do is provide opportunities for Guskov to find that kill shot, which I actually think that he might do, and that's where I'm more leaning with on this fight. I'm not convinced by either fighter, but especially as a favourite, I'm not going to be siding with Pauga. So with Guskov being the underdog, knockout power, and the fact that, like I say, I'm not massively high on either guy, I'm going to side with the power striker that's the underdog. So I'm picking Bogdan Guskov to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Haider Emil versus Fernie Garcia. Fernie Garcia stepping in on short notice against Haider Emil, who seems to have lost a couple of opponents for his UFC debut. Fernie Garcia stepped in a few days ago, and it's a brave step in, if I'm being honest, from a fighter that's 0-3 in the UFC. And, I suppose the last fight, you can't really take too much from that. He fought Rinya Nakamura, who Rinya Nakamura could potentially be a top 5, top 10 guy, maybe even higher than top 5. That remains to be seen in regards to that high of a ceiling. But Rinya Nakamura is a real legit fighter, so again, can't really take too much from that. But the fight before that, Fernie Garcia fought Brady Hiestand. Brady Hiestand is a decent fighter. He can cause problems, but he's in and around that level of Garcia. And Garcia did drop Hiestand early on, but then just got dominated after then. And then the fight before that, his UFC debut, he goes in there and loses against Journey Newson. And look, no disrespect to Journey Newson, but that's a fight that you'd probably expect Fernie Garcia to win, and he didn't. So he's 0-3 in the UFC and stepping in on short notice against a fighter in Haider Emil that, look, we saw in the Contender Series, this guy can absolutely grind. Like, if the going gets tough, he will keep pushing and pushing through. The cardio barriers is just... How he pushes through that cardio barrier in that Contender Series fight is insane, because Emre Sonmez was just relentless with that wrestling and grappling. So what we know from Haider Emil is he's got good forward pressure, good aggression, he's got good power, he can wrestle as well, he can grapple also, so he's a pretty well-rounded fighter, and he's also unbeaten at 8-0 as well, which is impressive. And the other side to this is Fernie Garcia's moving up in weight short notice to fight Haider Emil. So where Fernie Garcia's normally been a tall, long striker in the past against previous opponents, he's actually going to be at a height and reach disadvantage, probably at a strength and weight disadvantage as well. And with Haider Emil just being a good all-round fighter, a bit of a powerhouse on the feet, can knock you out, can wrestle and grapple as well. Wrestling and grappling is where the weaknesses and the holes are in Fernie Garcia's game. I just think Haider Emil's going to have the physical advantages. I think he's going to have a power and strength advantage as well. And he's probably got the multiple paths to victory as well, with being able to beat Garcia at his own game striking and being able to mix things up with the wrestling and grappling as well. So, like I said, I think it's a brave step up for Fernie Garcia. And if he can actually pull this off, then fair play to him, because, you know, there's not many fighters who are 0-3 in the UFC, probably on a 4-fight contract as well, that's going to step up in weight on short notice to have that 4th fight against a fighter that is, you know, a bit of a brick wall and is very tough and hard to break and beat. So, like I said, props to Fernie Garcia for taking the fight, but I'm picking Haider Emil to win this fight. And finally, the last fight to break down. I can't believe this is actually going to be the first fight on the card. Surely they're going to do a reshuffling of the fights and the fight order. We've got Daniel Marcos versus Arichi Lang. And man, this is actually a really good fight. Like I said, I can't believe that as it stands right now, it's going to be the fight that opens the entire card. I do think it could even be on the main event. Sorry, the main card. I genuinely think it's that good of a fight. So, look, Daniel Marcos has been a little bit unlucky lately with, you know, opponents pulling out and not being able to actually get inside the cage. But I think it's a fight here that he's actually going to be able to get inside the cage here, unless there is an unfortunate injury or something happens with the weight of Arichi Lang. I don't think that Marcos is going to be out of a fight here. I think he's going to get inside the cage. And Arichi Lang, he's a dangerous fighter, predominantly a striker, but he does have some wrestling and grappling. He's got levels there. I actually bet Arichi Lang as at plus money. I think I had to wait a long time during that fight week for the plus money against Johnny Munoz, but I cashed him relatively comfortably there. I thought it was a really good fight stylistically for Arichi Lang, and it showed. He was able to, you know, keep the fight standing and put it on Johnny Munoz. And the thing is that I think Arichi Lang's going to get the fight he wants here as well, because Arichi Lang, although he will mix in some wrestling and grappling and doesn't mind wrestling and grappling, you can tell that he's a fighter that wants to be in the face of his opponents, a fighter that wants to be aggressive and push forward and just stand and strike. Like, that's what he loves to do. And Marcos is going to give him that exact fight, and I think Marcos is going to get the fight that he wants as well. Now, the thing is with Daniel Marcos, I think he's much more technical than Arichi Lang. He moves really well on the back foot, which is a really great trait to have. I kind of use the analogy of football or soccer, if you're listening from the US, of being able to effectively use both feet, both your right and your left foot, to kick the ball and be effective. I kind of feel it's the same in MMA with moving forwards and backwards. If you can fight well backwards, then you're going to be a top fighter, because there's going to be moments where you're not having everything your way, and being able to still crack your opponent, still get up on volume and be effective and efficient on the back foot when your opponent's moving forwards, I think it's a real good trait to have. So there's going to be moments in this fight where Arichi Lang is pushing forwards, but I think Daniel Marcos is just going to pick him apart, moving backwards, you know, moving backwards and then lateral movement, left and right, getting out of bad positions, exiting, angling out, getting back into the middle of the cage. But then Marcos, I think once he starts landing on Arichi Lang, he's going to have moments moving forwards, and I think that's where he's going to really start getting at Arichi Lang, who's definitely a better forward presser than he is a fighter on the back foot. I think Marcos is just a level above Arichalang in regards to the quality of striking. And if Arichalang does try to wrestle and grapple to mix things up, Daniel Marcos has got decent takedown defense. If he does get down, he's got a decent get-up game as well. I think the best work in this fight from both sides is going to be striking, but I think Daniel Marcos is a level above Arichalang. I think Arichalang's actually a bit of a step down in competition from Davy Grant. In fact, I don't think it is a step down in competition from Davy Grant. I know a lot of people thought that Davy Grant should have won that fight against Marcos. I was kind of in that pool as well, if I'm being honest. And I bet Daniel Marcos against Davy Grant. And I thought Davy Grant might have edged it as well, but it was that close of a fight. But you look at the guys that Davy Grant's been fighting. He's been fighting at, high-level guys for years in the UFC. But I think Davy Grant is a better striker, wrestler, grappler, a better nail and a hammer than Arichalang also, and Daniel Marcos got through that. So I think Marcos has got a good fight ahead of him here. Like I said, it's been a bit of a tough run for him in regards to actually, getting an opponent inside a cage, but I think he finally does that on Saturday night, and I think he's going to put on another stellar performance. 15-0, it's Daniel Marcos is turning into a prospect to watch, but even at 15-0, that normally tells you that loss is going to happen very soon. It could potentially be within the next, sort of 2 to 3 fights. I just don't think Arichalang is the fighter unless he lands that one knockout shot, like I keep saying, UFC level, 4-ounce gloves, elite fighters. Arichalang could land that one shot that hits the button clean and knocks Marcos out. But if he doesn't land that, I don't think he's the fighter to take the loss from, to give Marcos his first loss. I think that'll come in a few fights' time. But for this specific fight, I think Marcos is going to be too much. I'm picking Daniel Marcos to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of On the Moneyline. As always, thank you for tuning in, whether that's on one of the podcast platforms, Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Music, or whether that's on YouTube. If you're not on YouTube, please head over to our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/MMA Play 365. Drop a subscription to the channel. It really helps us out. If you do want to post something in the comments as well, who you're betting on, if we disagree on any of the picks, we can always have that conversation. I am quite busy throughout the week, I'll be honest, but I do always try my best to get back to the comments and try and have that conversation. So again, I appreciate everybody tuning in and subscribing to the YouTube channel. And once again, if you want to jump into the betting action for this weekend on this card, then you can do so at MMAplay365.com. Plenty of different packages and subscription lengths for everybody, whether you just want one event, sign up monthly, or if you want to take advantage of our best value package, which is the $99 annual package, then we've got that as well. You get all the handicapper betting advice, all the Bayes AI advice and predictions from our UFC prediction software as well, all in one place. So if you want to jump into the action, that's MMAplay365.com. I'm Newsome. Thanks for listening. We'll see you again next week.